Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today. We have a presentation for you today of some really exciting latest research into approaches and outcomes for teaching computational thinking to young children, computational thinking and coding. And I'm very pleased to be joined by some of the leading researchers in the field of computational thinking, expressive coding, creative technology use in early childhood. Researchers from the Tufts University DevTech Research Group. So I wanted to, well, I'll introduce myself too. I'm Jason Innes. I'm the Director of Curriculum and Training at KinderLab Robotics. We're the makers of the Kibo robot, which is one of the tools that our research team here will be talking about today. And I just wanted to give a quick hi to the other panelists that I'm here with. So Madhu Govind, who's a PhD candidate at DevTech. Hi, Madhu. We have Amanda Strawhacker, Dr. Strawhacker, right? Who's also in the DevTech group. And then Emily Relkin. Hi, Emily. And Libby Hunt, who is a master's recipient from DevTech, but who has now moved on, and I'm sure she'll explain more of that. So all of our panelists will have a full, a more complete introduction in a few minutes, but I just wanted to say hi to everybody. Okay, and then a couple of other quick housekeeping items just about the webinar itself. The first and probably most important one that I want to share, and we're all on the panel disappointed about this, which is that Dr. Marina Bears, who is the chairperson of the Elliott Pearson School of Child Study at Tufts and also the head of the DevTech Research Group, she was going to be part of this webinar to be kind of the MC, the moderator of the panel discussion. And unfortunately, due to a personal emergency, she's not able to join us today. So the role of moderator and host is going to be played by Madhu here. So Madhu was instrumental in working with Dr. Bears to create the book that's the sort of compendium of the current research at DevTech. That book is the sort of focus of the panel discussion today, the research that's in the book. So Madhu played an important role in gathering that research, creating the book, and she will be the one to host the panel discussion. So thank you, Madhu, for stepping into that role in the last minute. And again, for everybody, I'm disappointed that we can't be joined by Dr. Bears, but Dr. Bears' thinking and research approach and philosophy of early childhood education permeates all of the research that you'll hear about today. So her voice really is speaking through her collaborators who we have on the line today. So remaining kind of housekeeping items. This is an open dialogue too, so the panelists are going to be talking to each other, but we also have a nice long chunk of time at the end of the hour for Q&A. So attendees, you guys are all muted, but you have a questions feature in the GoToMeeting interface where you can send questions to the speakers, to the panelists, and we'll save 15 minutes or so at the end of the hour for them to respond to your questions. So please do send questions through that questions feature. Christina, who's our marketing director, is going to be on that line, and she can answer sort of immediate questions you might have about how the webinar is working, or you know, how to get the book that the folks are going to be talking about. But if you have questions for the panelists, send them that same way. Christina will pass them along, and we will ask them of the panelists for you. You might also notice in the GoToMeeting or GoToWebinar interface, there's a handouts section. You can download a copy of the slides from that handouts section. So the researchers are going to be sharing sort of pointers or links to items. They're going to be sharing data, information. All of that's available in the slides, so feel free to grab a copy. And if you're watching this recording, just send an email to us at KinderLab and we can help you get a copy of the slides. Okay, and then the last item, is that the end of the slides will have contact information for all of the researchers, for KinderLab, and for Dr. Bears. So if you grab a copy of those slides or screenshot it at the end, you'll be able to get email addresses, and the researchers have expressed willingness and openness to engage, about any questions about their research. So thank you to them. All right, so that is our housekeeping. I was gonna just send now quickly a question out to all of you, the attendees, to just learn, so we can learn a little bit more about you and what brought you here to this webinar. So it's a simple question, just we're curious what your role is in early childhood education. There's only 5 choices, so just choose the one that you feel is most, applicable to your particular role. And that way the attendees or the panelists can share a little bit more, targeted thinking. So we're seeing, I'll keep this just up for another 10 seconds or so. We're getting a nice strong showing from our library media specialists, technology specialists, literacy specialists. So that's wonderful to know that we have a wide range of folks from different roles, but a nice strong showing from our specialists who are interested in this kind of curriculum integration. So I'm going to close that poll now, and we can share out the results for folks. So there you see that almost half of our attendees today identify themselves as library media literacy or technology specialists. So that's great. Okay, I'm going to hide that poll for now and carry on with our slides. Thank you, attendees, for sharing that information about yourselves. And again, I really encourage you to use that questions feature to ask questions during the webinar. Okay, I'm going to just keep hold of the spotlight for 2 more minutes to just share a tiny bit about KinderLab and Kibo. I know probably most people who are here on the webinar are familiar with Kibo, but it's a expression, a usable product that you can use in the classroom that really embodies a lot of the research that the folks today are going to be talking about. So KinderLab, we were founded by Professor Bears, thanks to an NSF grant that the government, the NSF gave her to commercialize the research that led to the Kibo robot. So our product is Kibo. It's a hands-on, screen-free coding, engineering, and kind of expressive technology platform designed for early childhood, 4 to 7-year-olds in particular. Children can program the robot, decorate it, use it to explore some of the ideas of computational thinking and expressive technology use that our panelists will be talking about. It's really easy to use for kids and for teachers. One of the special things about Kibo that makes it screen-free is that children create programs for the robot, code for the robot, not by typing on a screen or dragging icons around on a tablet. They use wooden blocks where each block represents one action for the robot to take. They create a sequence of these physical wooden blocks and then read that sequence using a barcode scanner built into the robot. So they're using tangible manipulatives that feel very familiar in an early childhood context. And the focus is always on the physical space of the classroom rather than taken away onto screens. And we can integrate these kinds of activities into our curriculum through these ideas of imagination play, storytelling, and expressive sequencing. So our robot, through the decoration the children create, becomes a fire truck. We attach our light bulb, and then we give a story to Kibo where the fire truck honks its horn with our beep command, flashes its siren, red and then white, and then drives forward to help the people in the town. The story that the children are imagining and telling becomes the context for them to experiment with coding and sequencing. So by bringing these ideas together, Kibo allows us to do things like literacy integration and other cross-curricular engagement with coding. Okay, and of course, Kibo is the brainchild of Professor Bears, who again sends her regrets that she couldn't join us today. She's our co-founder at KinderLab. She's the chair of the Elliott Pearson School at Tufts, and she's also the leader of the DevTech Research Group, which is the home of the research that we're going to be talking about today and of these 4 researchers. Kibo and Scratch Junior actually were both created at the DevTech Lab. So both of those tools will come up in the conversation. Dr. Barris continues to research and publish with the collaboration of her team. All of her books are great. One of the latest book, which the team will be talking about today, is a kind of overview of a lot of the research that's been going on at the lab. We're excited that one attendee at this webinar will actually win a copy of this book to, for themselves or for their school library. So we'll follow up about that after the webinar. But at this point, it's time to get to the main event. So I'm going to turn it over now to Madhu Govind to introduce both herself and the other team members and talk a bit about how the flow will go. So I'm going to just let you take it away, Madhu, and I'll give you control over the slides now.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jason. Good afternoon, good morning to wherever people are tuning in from. Really excited to be a part of this panel today. Again, apologies that Dr. Barris could not be here, but I know that this book and this panel is something that she's been really looking forward to. Just last night, we were celebrating the 20th anniversary of the DevTech Research Group. So this book really is a celebration and a synthesis of the work that she and her lab have been doing over the past 20 years. So I'm really excited for today's panel, just to be able to share with some of my closest friends in the lab and colleagues to talk about some of the awesome work that we've been working on. And one thing that's pretty cool that I think is about this book is that we started and completed the book in the context of the pandemic. So a lot of our topics and our research has really been informed about all the different things that we were dealing with personally and professionally during that time, which I think is also a very unique contribution for the book. So my name is Madhu Govind. I'm a PhD candidate at the DevTech Research Group, and I'll be talking about 3 of the chapters in the book. And the way that we'll run the panel is have all of the panelists first briefly introduce themselves, and then we've organized the panel around 3 topics about coding and computational thinking that I will introduce after my panelists introduce themselves. So we'll go to the next slide.
Hello, everyone. So excited to be here with all of you today. As Madhu mentions, this book is very near and dear to all of our hearts at DevTech and our collaborations with KinderLab. My name is Amanda Strawhacker. I am a very recent doctor at the DevTech Lab, and I'm also the Associate Director of the Early Childhood Technology Graduate Certificate Program. Jason was actually an alum of the program. Madhu has been a TA. So this is a great group if you have questions about furthering your graduate degree or, your graduate credits, graduate performance in this particular area of early childhood technology. Really excited to speak to you today about the chapters in this book. I was fortunate to be able to co-author at least 4 of the chapters in the book, and I'm going to be sharing with you today about 3 of them. And what I think is so wonderful about all of you coming from such diverse backgrounds and such different settings is that I think the takeaway from this book is that computational thinking can happen anywhere in so many contexts with so many different demographics of children, so many different learning goals. So I'm very excited to share with you today what we've learned in our time at DevTech.
Hi, everyone. My name is Emily Relkin. I'm a 4th-year PhD student at Tufts University, and I've also been working with the DevTech Research Group for about 6 years now. My undergraduate degree is in psychology, and my PhD is in child development with a focus on computational thinking and how young children acquire these very vital skills. I co-wrote a chapter with Dr. Strawhacker, chapter 3, about unplugged learning. And I also wrote a chapter on Tech Check, which is an unplugged assessment of computational thinking that I created and validated during my graduate studies. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. So excited to be here with you all. My name is Libby Hunt. I am a recent graduate of the master's program at Elliott Pearson in Child Study and Human Development at Tufts, and a former member of the DevTech research group. And I currently am working as a clinical research specialist at the Digital Wellness Lab at Boston Children's Hospital. My primary focus now is in adolescent media use and its effects, but early childhood technological use is very dear to my heart, and I'm so excited to talk about all of the great chapters. Thanks.
Awesome. And one thing that I do want to mention before we get started is that the book actually has over 14 different contributors. So we're hearing from 4 of us today, but if you do want to get in touch with any of the other co-authors or contributors to the book, please do reach out and we'll put you in touch with those chapters or those chapter authors, because it really is a really wonderful group of contributors for this book. Now, before we get into the first question for the panel, we did want to provide kind of an overview of what computational thinking is and how we define it at the DevTech research group. So there's a lot of different definitions for what computational thinking is, but the focus that we like to really keep on is a set of human thought processes that permit the framing and solving of problems with computers, robots, and other technologies. So today we'll talk about how this definition really kind of emphasizes how computational thinking is not necessarily specific to the discipline of computer science, but is also applicable to other disciplines and just everyday life. And computational thinking in the early childhood context, we really use the Powerful Ideas framework that Dr. Bears put out in her Coding as a Playground book, which identifies different ideas of computational thinking that are appropriate for young children to engage and explore in. So these powerful ideas are powerful because they're not specific to computer science, but it is a vital skill, as Emily pointed out, that can be applicable to other areas. So we'll see our panelists today referring to these different concepts and how they relate to different disciplines or activities in everyday life. So if you have any questions about these powerful ideas or how they connect, definitely feel free to save that for the Q&A or hear from our panelists. So we'll first get started with the first question, which is about interdisciplinary learning with computational thinking. So our first question for our panelists, so you'll hear from myself as well as from Dr. Strawhacker, is how is computational thinking connected to learning in other content areas? So one of the chapters in the book is called Rhyme and Reason, the connections among coding, computational thinking, and literacy. And I had the absolute privilege of co-authoring this chapter with Dr. Ziva Hassenfeld and Dr. Laura DeRuiter. So Dr. Hassenfeld comes from a literacy background and Dr. DeRuiter comes from a linguistics background. So hearing both of those perspectives and understanding what are the connections between coding, computational thinking with literacy and language is something that we really delved into this chapter. And we summarized the theoretical and empirical work that seems to unpack the similarities and differences between these different domains. And what we argue in this chapter is that sometimes we focus on one specific discipline, and what we argue here is that these connections actually go hand in hand, and they're really developmentally co-aligned. A lot of the research currently at the DevTech research group is about coding as another language, which emphasizes coding as an activity that is expressive, that allows children to make meaning of the world around them. And so we've developed these extensive curriculum units using Scratch Junior and Kibo, which you can freely access using the website link that you see here on the slide. And these are very comprehensive grade level units that are aligned to computer science and ELA frameworks, national and international frameworks that really try to unpack how coding can be another language, how it can be a medium for thinking about creative self-expression and artistic expression, and seeing how coding and writing can really go hand in hand. So I encourage you to check out the chapter, but also for our educators and our media specialists looking for curricular resources, I really encourage you to check out this curriculum because we've been doing a lot of research on the impact of this curriculum on literacy and coding and computational thinking outcomes. And what we've seen is some tremendous growth in student learning as well as teacher learning of these important concepts.
All right, thank you, Madhu. And just to further complicate the interdisciplinary connections we can make with computational thinking, I authored a chapter on computational thinking and life science. So a lot of this chapter actually draws on and expands on my own dissertation work, developing a novel tool called CRISPy, which you can read a lot more about. But at the heart of this chapter is taking a hard look at STEM and STEAM and how it's been sort of framed for the last decade or even 100 years. And over the time that we've talked about technology with young children, there's so much to explore. We often invite children to think about how made objects in the world function, how they work. And we know so much about teaching about the natural world as well. And it might surprise you to know that there are actually so many overlaps that it could function as a curriculum. And in fact, in the book or in the chapter, you'll see how it did. We talked with children about the engineering design process, the process of going through the steps of engineering design, where you ask a question, you start to design and imagine what your solution could be, and then you test it in the real world. And the similarities between that and, for example, the scientific method, a similar process to help build knowledge or design ideas. What happens when real world scientists fuse design and investigation, as they do right now in all over the world. And in the chapter, I talk about some very relevant daily examples you might not even know in your daily life are the result of what's called bioengineering, engineering the algorithms of life. So this whole project was about a tool that sort of brought that metaphor to tangible life for children, thinking about real algorithms, natural algorithms in the world, and comparing those to algorithms like you might find in Kibo, the way that you structure a code to perform a specific set of actions, and where are the limits and where is the ethical questioning there. And actually, if you read the chapter, you'll see how the children themselves were the ones who brought about the ethics question and brought us down a whole other fascinating direction of thinking about ethical design and how we can make sure that our designs are sustainable and useful for general good of all living things. So thank you very much for letting me share about this chapter. Now I'll let Madhu continue with the next one. Unless it's me. It's me. So actually, just to shift gears a little bit, this chapter I co-authored with Dr. Amanda Sullivan. She has a drama background, and the two of us have worked on a number of projects where we were really bringing the A out in STEAM. So especially if you are someone like a librarian or tech and media specialist, you're thinking of ways to use these tools in a variety of topics and domains, the arts is there for you. And this chapter gives in vivid detail a few different ways that you could actually use these tools in performance art, in visual art, in dramatic art. And I would say that just to share one anecdote from the chapter, we talk a lot about the Playmaker program in Singapore. It was a research project with hundreds of children in schools all over the country of Singapore, where they wanted to use the Kibo robot to bring about some cohesion, some discussion in the kids around culture, because Singapore is by nature a very diverse country. It has 3 national languages to start, not to mention all the other diversity that's not codified in its charters. So the children used Kibo to share about themselves. And if you're familiar with the Dances from Around the World curriculum, this was really it in action. They performed alongside their robots, and importantly, they also practiced performing on their own, talking about their robots. And that's something in STEAM education that often gets overlooked, but is such a critical part of children's development, is learning how to public speak, learning how to defend your ideas, learning how to share your work. So that's what you can find in the computational expression chapter.
Thanks, Amanda. So we'll now shift gears a little bit and think about computational thinking and values. So we first started talking about how computational thinking might be connected to other disciplines. But now we're thinking beyond just academic disciplines, how can we set up learning environments and activities that foster computational thinking, among other things that we care about, which are human values. So here, again, we'll hear from Dr. Strawhacker and myself, but also from Libby Hunt.
Okay, so you already heard me talk about how I think ethics and values is actually something that really deserves a place in children's curricula when we're bringing in technology. If you ever worked in a makerspace, you know that it doesn't really function without a community, without people who care about the tools and the products that you're working with. So in this chapter, we share a little bit of our own research confirming that suspicion you might have that a makerspace really does belong to the community that uses it. And we also share about ways that you can use your makerspace, ways that you can position your materials, put provocations around the room, how you can sort of tweak your facilitation so that you can invite children to become agents within that space, create their own values, and realize those values, manifest those values in the work that they share. And there are, again, some anecdotal examples in there from our own research that give you examples of how through the act of their physical making, exploring novel tools, trying things out, tinkering, children are really getting at those powerful ideas of computational thinking that Madhu already laid out for us so beautifully. The design process and representation are pretty obvious, but you can also get at pretty deep thinking just through the act of exploration through your hands and your body.
So one of the projects that we had done at the DevTech Research Group was about how to engage families and informal learning settings to engage in coding and computational thinking with young children. So when we think about computational thinking as not just something that is taught in schools or coding platforms that are just introduced in a school environment, a lot of the times children's first experiences with these kinds of activities are through their caregivers when they visit libraries or museums, or their own families do activities because they have a STEM background or an interest in STEM. So in this chapter, we try to characterize caregivers as gatekeepers of young children's experiences with coding and computational thinking, but also, more importantly, how we can actually engage older family members like siblings, parents, grandparents as co-learners and co-designers. Libby and Jason, we were just talking at the beginning of this webinar about how our own technological experiences might give us biases about how we might engage with technology. So in this chapter, we talk about how parents don't necessarily have to be coding experts, or as facilitators, we don't have to know all of the answers before engaging in these kinds of activities with young children. So this chapter provides some examples of that. And a lot of the literature on joint media engagement, which is about how children engage with media like televisions, tablets, coding platforms like Kibo, how the learning can just be so much more enhanced when they're doing it alongside other people, whether that be their peers or their family members. So a lot of this work about using coding and computational thinking tools with other people in informal learning spaces really extends that literature of joint media engagement and treats technology not just as something that can be consumed by children, but also something that children can produce digital, creative, and computational artifacts alongside other people, and see how all of those ideas they can come bridge together and share so that they can create something really collaborative. So an example of this has been our Family Coding Days project. So we conducted these informal learning workshops that spanned an hour or 2 or 3 hours on an evening or an after-school program on a weekend. And we engaged family members to come in and learn about either Scratch Junior or Kibo, work together on a coding project with their children, and then be able to share their projects with the rest of their cohort at the end of the workshop. And we learned a lot of really cool things from this project. We learned how parents who felt like they were not coding experts, had little to do with coding, leave with having this invested interest in engaging their children in additional coding opportunities. We saw children getting really excited about their projects and wanting to share their projects with their family members or the peers sitting around them. So this workshop, we actually created a protocol out of that you can actually use and be able to facilitate a family coding day in your own community. So if you are interested in doing that, definitely feel free to check out this website for that workshop protocol, and it has lots of different sample agendas and activity ideas. And it's definitely a resource that we've seen a lot of people use, especially in this past year. So definitely want to make sure that you check that out. One of the things that we also have been working on at the lab is how to look at student learning, not just from a standardized assessment, but also from the projects that they actually create. So this chapter on examining young children's computational artifacts, I co-wrote with another doctoral student in our lab, Aim Unahalekaka, and we talked about project rubrics. So how do we assess young children's computational artifacts, whether that be through Scratch Junior or Kibo? And one thing that we talked about in this chapter is how these rubrics are not just looking at the programming concepts that are exhibited within a project, so the kinds of repeat loops that they're using or conditional statements, but also the project design elements. How are they thinking computationally when they're putting their robotics projects together and trying to figure out what kinds of arts and materials that they're going to use? One of the questions that we get a lot is with Scratch Junior is, I can't get my children to actually code using the programming blocks. They're on the paint editor all of the time. And then we engage in a conversation about how computational thinking can actually be very evident when they're in the paint editor and trying to figure out how to design their characters. So one of the cool things about these rubrics and the projects that children can create with Scratch Junior and Kibo and these other open-ended coding platforms is that children can engage in computational thinking in more than just through coding. And that's been really powerful to see.
So I had the good fortune of working on this chapter with Dr. Bears. It's titled Coding, Computational Thinking, and Cultural Contexts. And the chapter recounts a research project called Beyond STEM, the development of virtues in early childhood education through robotics. And through that recounting, we explore how sociocultural contexts like schools, homes, faith-based community settings really inform how computational thinking is both taught and learned. The chapter also provides a number of examples from the project implementation of coding and computational thinking being used as a tool for deeper exploration of the cultural traditions, meaning making, and creative expression. Next slide, please. Thank you. The research project was conducted in interfaith and secular kindergarten classrooms in both Boston and Buenos Aires, and it utilized the Kibo curriculum for emergent readers, which is a 12-week curriculum comprised of 12 lessons that utilizes the coding as another language pedagogical approach that Madhu talked about earlier. And through this chapter, we discussed the different ways that students drew from their experiences and surroundings to conceptualize these really abstract concepts throughout the curriculum, not only just about computational thinking, but also about their classroom's core principles and what it means to be human. We spotlight the culmination of these efforts, final projects that reflect both Kibo mastery and thoughtful interpretations of each school's different cultures and values. And the chapter also discusses pre and post implementation professional development days that we held for participating teachers, the benefits of those cross-cultural collaborations, and the lessons learned that can inform other teachers who are interested in incorporating Kibo into their own classrooms.
Thanks, Libby. And a really cool thing about this project was that it was, this curriculum is the piloted version of what the Coding as Another Language curriculum that I mentioned early on. So it's really cool to see how thinking about how this curriculum was implemented in other contexts allowed us to learn more about coding as another language and really refine our philosophy and refine our curriculum to really emphasize those literacy and language connections to a broader context. So that's been a really cool extension of this work. So the last framing question that before we kind of delve into a more of an open Q&A is, now that we've thought about computational thinking from different disciplines and how it can promote other human values and other outcomes that we care about for young children, how do we promote computational thinking for all children? And what are ways to understand and promote CT learning for everyone, not just certain individuals? So for this question, we'll hear from Emily Relkin, again from Libby.
Thank you, Madhu. Jeanette Wing popularized the concept of computational thinking in a very famous 2006 paper. And part of the success of her paper was the idea that computational thinking was not only something that computer scientists needed to know, but also very helpful in other disciplines and everyday life. In this chapter, Dr. Strawhacker and I discuss how to draw upon children's everyday experiences that provide them with intuition about coding and computational thinking concepts. As many of you probably already know, unplugged activities were designed to teach children computer science topics without actually requiring the use of a computer. And this can be achieved by having children engage in simple activities that exemplify aspects of coding. So for example, you could have children sort a line of people by height, and that could be considered analogous to sorting an array. In this chapter, we describe how to use young children's everyday experiences to foster the same type of learning as traditional computer science unplugged activities. For example, the sequence of activities involved in brushing one's teeth could provide an unplugged illustration of algorithmic thinking. We also provide a guide to creating and implementing unplugged learning opportunities for young children. On the next slide, you will see a list of the powerful ideas from computer science that Madhu and Amanda had previously mentioned, and that's on the left. And then on the right, you'll see examples of unplugged activities from everyday life, and we discuss those activities further in the chapter. And on the next slide, so this is my next chapter. It's very difficult to bring computer science to the classroom without a good way to measure it. So in this chapter, I focus on assessment of computational thinking in young children. When I started my graduate studies, what was missing from the field was a reliable and valid instrument for measuring computational thinking in classroom settings. The instruments that did exist at the time were mostly based on coding exercises and couldn't be used with children that hadn't yet learned to program. To address this need, I created an instrument called PreK-2nd that uses unplugged activities rather than coding exercises. And this makes it useful because it can be administered regardless of a child's prior knowledge with coding. And then on the next slide, you'll see over the course of time, we did refine the format of PreK-2nd to better accommodate different ages and stages of children's development. Here you can see an example of an algorithmic thinking sequencing question rendered in different formats that are suitable for kindergarten, first, and second and third grade, respectively. PreK-2nd has proven to have good psychometric properties over the course of several studies involving thousands of children. It's enabled us to measure the rate of development of computational thinking skills as children grow. And it can also examine the effects of coding curricula on the acquisition of computational thinking. There are links to request PreK-2nd on the DevTech website, and I'll also drop a link in the chat. Thank you very much.
Great. So this final chapter, I had the good fortune of collaborating with Dr. Ziva Hassenfeld and PhD candidate Tess Levinson on. It's titled Including Students with Disabilities in the Coding Classroom. And this chapter examines the current state of coding and computational thinking education for students with disabilities in the United States specifically. In it, we provide a summary of the current research into computer science education for students with both high and low incidence disabilities. We also discuss a current tension that exists between instructionist pedagogies commonly used by special educators and constructionist pedagogies for computational thinking, and advocate for more research into the efficacy of constructionist curricula for these students. Lastly, we provide a case study of a student with a high incidence disability, selective mutism, from the Beyond STEM project from my previous chapter. And the case study discusses our ethnographic observations of her learning at Kibo in a general education classroom, the different accommodations that her teacher and peers made to ensure an inclusive and engaging environment. For example, like this picture shows an activity where students wrote their answers on a whiteboard and held them up as opposed to responding verbally. And how those accommodations really ultimately supported her mastery of the Kibo language. This chapter highlights the importance of equal access for computer science education and discusses the efforts already being made by different initiatives like Access CS for All, and calls for more research into and the development of education programs in robotics and computational thinking for students with disabilities. Thank you.
Awesome. So that was probably a lot to hear, but I think what you've probably gained out of this is that there's so many different connections to be made with coding and computational thinking, and the research just that has been done in the last several years has really just like skyrocketed our current knowledge around these topics and how we can continue to extend students' learning experiences with coding and computational thinking, and how it's really a whole range of factors that we can consider, from teacher professional development to interdisciplinary connections to accommodations and modifications for students with disabilities. So there's a whole range of learning and more research to be done that I think all of us are really excited to be continuing the work for. But I'll turn it over back to Jason to do the Q&A.
Sure, thank you, Madhu, and thank you to all of you for sharing the topics of your research and some of the exciting directions that that this field is moving in, that we'll start to see, moving into practice in coming years. So actually, the question that I wanted to kind of pass along from the audience first is a kind of general one, which is, you guys have touched on all of these different contexts for learning, like Dr. Strawhacker, you mentioned about makerspace activities. Libby, you shared about, addressing like activities that draw on the school's mission, as an expressive context. And I wonder if you'd mind, like almost like a lightning round, where maybe each of you could share, thinking of our audience as today mostly, tech integrators, librarians, classroom teachers, people concerned with putting what you've learned into practice. Maybe could you share like a example of an activity that a teacher or educator might be able to implement that draws on the research that you've shared? And I'll leave it to you to decide, but I know Amanda, you had mentioned the makerspace context first, so maybe if you'd feel comfortable kicking it off, that'd be super.
Absolutely. Making is such a unique place to pull examples, right? Because at least my conception of it is that it's the one place in a building, a school or a classroom setting, where kids are sort of allowed to set the curriculum. Whenever I have students come into a makerspace, I like to start with an orienting discussion about what it is we want to make today. There's so many directions you could go, and you can set out provocations and make it sort of a center time activity. But something I like to do is make sure that we have an orienting purpose or a goal. Sometimes we do that with a shared book that they're already reading, and we envision, in the context of this story, what's something that the protagonist really could have used? Could we make something for them to solve their problems so they don't have to go on this wacky adventure that the story talks about? Or is there some way that we could introduce a new solution that never even gets addressed in this book, but could have actually taken the story on a different turn? So novel engineering, you may have heard that phrase, is a really great way to place the inspiration on the onus of the children to figure out what it is they want to build. And in the context of, ethics and values in your technology work, I'll just offer a very quick example. An activity we ran during our CRISPy camp, so that's that bioengineering themed science camp, was to invite the kids to take Mancala beads, or like, marbles with flat bottoms. And we gave them pictures that sort of demonstrated things that they might value. So you might value family or your friends, or, helping others, or the nature or school. And we only gave them a few. And we said, you have to pick the ones that mean the most to you in your heart. What's the most important value that you want to think about designing for today? And we then went around the room and thought about how everyone's values chart looked a little bit different, and everyone's values chart was equally valid. No one had a wrong answer for picking a value. And I think that's a great place to start when you think about design with young children, recognizing that any design can be a good design depending on why you're doing it and what it is what problem you're trying to solve with it, what group you're trying to help with it. So that's just one example of how we might start sort of the orientation of getting into building. And then maybe if there's time after this lightning round, we can talk more about integrating technology for very specific ideas. I'd love to hear people in the chat sort of think about if they have specific questions or specific ideas that they're trying to sort of ruminate on, and how they're trying to integrate technology in their settings.
Thanks, Amanda. Anybody else want to share about an activity drawing from their research?
I can share one little example that we've seen with teachers being very intentional about the vocabulary that they use in their classrooms to reinforce computational thinking terms, even if they may not be necessarily teaching a coding lesson. So something like the concept of algorithm, when you think about the definition of an algorithm, it's a step-by-step way of doing something. So we've seen teachers who are giving instructions for a literacy lesson or a math lesson, but talk about those instructions as an algorithm, and using that vocabulary in the classroom, or whenever children are working on maybe an engineering task or in a building block corner, and they come across different problems that they need to fix, calling them debuggers, or thinking about, what is debugging is, finding and fixing errors. So the different problem solving strategies that they use, and being very intentional about that vocabulary. Children loved calling themselves little debuggers. They loved being able to use this vocabulary called algorithms. And the more that we be intentional about using them, the more that it feels less like a term that doesn't take place in the early childhood classroom. And I think that's been something that teachers have found really powerful.
Just to go off of what Madhu said, we all know that teachers are very, very busy, and with mandates of computer science starting as early as preschool can be really overwhelming to start having to think about how you can integrate computer science, coding, and computational thinking into classrooms. So I just wanted to emphasize the integration piece that Madhu had previously mentioned. Integrating computer science into other subjects is an amazing way to foster these skills. And it doesn't have to be extremely high tech. For example, using unplugged activities, like you could have a song, for example, and the class writes a song, and then you break it up into different steps. That's modularity. And you sequence it, that's algorithms, and maybe you have to debug the song because it doesn't sound right. So really you can get these computational thinking concepts fostered really in many different ways with integration.
Absolutely. That the point that you were making there, Emily, and also Madhu, about integrating this vocabulary of computational thinking into activities that are sort of normal and natural parts of the early childhood classroom routine. I think that's a really great point, that we don't need to address these skills or develop these skills only in the context of coding or using robots. It's something that comes up in looking at our daily routines in the classroom, looking at processes that we engage in. And one of the, I know, Libby, I'm not trying to take your turn on sharing an activity, but I'll just mention that one of the other questions we've gotten from the audience is about how we can sort of encourage the development of like age-appropriate ways to sort of introduce concepts like the engineering design process and computational thinking, and using this vocabulary to talk about normal routines in the classroom sounds like one way to do that. But Libby, do you have an example of something about like sort of letting children express something about their, you know, their heritage or their cultural background that connects to your research?
So the way that the schools went about connecting the Kipos to their own particular values, it was through these discussions about what are the different missions of our school, writing it all out, taking these abstract concepts and talking about what they are, like humility or unity, generosity, and then through the act of storytelling, how do we create Kibo projects that represent these really abstract concepts? So we had students think about the different situations that they were relating to. For example, one school had recently had a food drive. So the projects that they came up with, or the stories that they were telling, were really related to that food drive that they had recently experienced. So I can echo all of the things that my colleagues have said, but I think that the really important thing is looking at what's already in your classroom and using that as the starting point for integrating this curriculum, because it's all already there.
Great. Another question that we had might address or might be addressed by Emily, your work with assessment that you talked about, but we had one attendee asking or saying that they're from a district that doesn't have a comprehensive kind of K-5 coding or engineering program, and are there elements of your research or advice that you might have about how to help a teacher who's passionate about this kind of make a case within their district that it is important to teach these skills in early childhood? And that's not just for Emily, of course, but it made me think assessment's probably part of that, part of the mix.
Right, that's a great question. One resource that I might point them to is the Coding as Another Language curricula. That might be a good place to start, just to look at different activities and how these activities can be integrated into subjects such as math and literacy. I think often a lot of people think of computer science kind of as, or in coding as kind of like an individual act that's not necessarily needed because, you know, not everybody's going to be a computer scientist, but really that curricula shows that it also overlaps and can help in other disciplines. And also not only in other disciplines, but with values, as Libby was talking about, social emotional learning. And so that would be, I think, a great place to start.
I'm also going to jump in here because I think a lot of the, even prior to this book, some of the older research at DevTech might be relevant. So I don't know, Christina, if we have the DevTech Research Group's website pulled up, but I can find that link right after this. All of the publications that we summarize in the book are available for free on the website, and you can always sort of peel through those, and especially Marina's earlier books and some of her research on sequencing. If you just looked for the word sequencing in our publications page, touches on some of the ways that, especially if you're trying to make a case to, for example, a district administrator about why coding is so important as a way to support and reinforce other foundational skills. In our research, at least, we found that sequencing is the #1 learning outcome that you want to focus on. The order of algorithms matters in a code. It also matters in letters, and it matters in numeracy, and it matters for understanding time, and it matters for explaining yourself to an adult, and it matters for the organization of our day. It's just important. It's important to every domain, and primarily those math and literacy, those big two that you might be thinking about for your standards, or your administrator might be thinking about hitting certain goals on. We have seen correlates between coding skills and understanding foundational sequencing in math and literacy. So just as a starting point, I know Emily and others might have better resources for thinking about how to actually build your progressive K-5 curriculum. And if that's something you're hoping to do, I actually strongly encourage you to check out the ECT program, where you spend a year remotely working on these kinds of questions, how to build your own curricula or set your own learning goals. But I think just in the way of buy-in, you want to start thinking about foundational skills, and sequencing is really the strongest evidence we can point to.
Amanda, I just want to really emphasize the ECT program again, just because a lot of the teachers that I've worked with at DevTech and with a different organization is that when they feel like they don't necessarily have the support in their school or their district, one very great resource is being able to connect with a community of other educators and other specialists who are really passionate about this work. And I think that's one of the most beautiful things about the ECT program is that you are connected with a national and international cohort that is all invested in this type of content, and you get to work on your own individual projects but get feedback from others. So just another plug in for the program, because I do think that the work that we've seen from those students has just been phenomenal, and they've been able to take that work back into their schools and their districts and really create this long-lasting impact for their colleagues, which has been amazing to see.
Absolutely. We have time for one more quick question, which kind of keys off of the topic that you were just describing about integration and addressing all the curricular areas as a way of sort of showing the importance of these materials. I wonder, Madhu, thinking about that integration and especially the literacy connection that's part of the Coding as Another Language curriculum, and which you opened the slides with. One of our attendees was wondering whether there is any evidence building up yet that engagement with computational thinking and coding actually drives improved outcomes on literacy assessment. I'm just curious if you're seeing any, if that's been a focus of the studies, and if you're seeing anything there that spending time developing these skills in a coding context actually does translate into literacy outcomes.
Yeah, I'll have Emily share a little bit about some of the outcomes from her work, but with respect to literacy outcomes, we have some evidence. When we looked at a second grade sample, we looked at their literacy measures at the beginning of the year and their coding measures at the end or throughout their experience with the coding curriculum. And what we found was a small positive correlation between the two. So students who were stronger in their literacy performance tended to be also stronger in their coding performance. However, that correlation was not as strong as you might think in terms of how they're related. And so that really kind of propelled us to think that perhaps there are students who may not be as strong in their literacy, but they're still really excelling with coding. And we've done a lot of work since that little pilot study to understand the relationship between coding and literacy performance. And some of our findings thus far is with a quasi-experimental approach. So we have classrooms that are engaging with the CalKibo or the Cal curriculum, whether that be Kibo or Scratch Junior, and classrooms that are not and operating business as usual. And when we look at their standardized literacy measures, we see no significant differences between those two groups, which means that the group that is getting the CalKibo or Cal Scratch Junior curriculum, they're getting the same kind of content instruction, plus they're able to engage in this innovative coding and robotics experience. And we've been able to see gains in their coding and computational thinking with that group. So if they're getting, equal literacy performance, but they're also gaining these new 21st century skills, and that's emerging evidence that this integration is something that is working, and we need more research to really kind of investigate that. But Emily, I'm sure you have more to say on this topic too.
Yeah, so I actually wanted to talk about the computational thinking aspect of that study. So it took place in Norfolk, Virginia, with hundreds of children, and children received the tech check assessment that I talked about earlier before and after they engaged in the Coding as Another Language curriculum. And we also had a sample of control students that just participated in everyday classroom activities. And we found that the children in the Coding as Another Language group improved significantly more than the control group. And this improvement equated to 7 months of natural development in only a 6-week time span. So really introducing children to coding and computational thinking can really accelerate this knowledge. There's something called the Matthew effect. So by introducing children young, the effects really have been seen to multiply when they get older. So it's very important to start early.
Great. Well, thank you for addressing those questions from the audience. I wish we have more questions, and I wish we had more time, but it is 1 o'clock Eastern now. So to respect your time and the time of our attendees, we'll wrap up the panel. But I do want to emphasize a couple of points that those resources are all available on the DevTech website. So the curricula, information about these assessments, all of that is available there. So if you, we've shared the link in the chat, but if you Google Tufts DevTech, you'll be able to access all of those materials as well. And the curriculum is wonderful, and you can put it into practice in your classroom with Scratch Junior or Kibo. I'll just share this one thought from Dr. Bears that kind of connects coding and literacy. I'll put it up there, but she sort of points out, this is from one of her books, that we think of coding as a literacy as a means of understanding how the world works, just like reading and writing. We don't teach reading and writing so all kids can become professional journalists or novelists. We teach writing and reading so that children can express themselves and think in new ways. So that sentiment, I think, ties together some of the points that drive the research that the team shared, and I'll just leave you with that thought. So this slide here, again, you can take a screenshot, you can download the slides from the handout section, but all of our panelists have expressed that they would love to connect with you after the fact. So if you're interested in the research they've shared, please do reach out. So thank you, attendees, for coming to the webinar, and thank you very much, panelists, for coming and sharing your expertise and all of the sort of hard work that you've been doing to understand how children learn creative technology use. So with that, I'll say goodbye, and thank you all again for joining us.
Thank you so much for having us. Feel free to reach out.
Bye.